Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. War is never a good thing. We're well into the first week of the war on Iran, a war that Iran hasn't really wanted, a war that Israel certainly has wanted, and a war which many say Trump was reluctant to do. Either way, we're in it now, and I've got nobody better to give us that evaluation and assessment of what's actually happening on the ground. Nobody better than Scott Ritter, who's a military analyst extraordinaire, has a prolific record over the last few years, calling out these wars and assessing military power and what will or won't happen in the region. Well, Scott, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
And you're probably on the social media scene. For me, the primary source of a lot of people's knowledge about the industrial military complex, the USA. They've gone into this war, and now what? What's actually happening on the ground? If your overview first, and then we'll kind of break down how we got here.
Well, first of all, understand that this is a war that's been a long time in the planning. The 12-day war that was fought back in June between Israel and Iran was a war that was closely coordinated with Israel and the United States. The United States and Israel have been carrying out joint military exercises for years now, planning this very possibility. The U.S. and Israeli intelligence services likewise have been coordinating very closely on the Iranian target. And so the notion that this war was foisted upon Donald Trump unwillingly is an absurdity in the extreme. This is a war that Donald Trump has been preparing for some time, and it's a war that represents the only policy option that he would embrace. We now know that nuclear negotiations was never something Donald Trump seriously, considered when it came to Iran. The Iranians put the best deal possible on the table with their Omani interlocutors prior to this conflict, and Donald Trump dismissed it in favor of war. So any notion that Donald Trump entered this conflict unwillingly is absurd. This was a war that Donald Trump very much wanted, a war that Israel very much wanted. Now what we're seeing is the difficulty of taking desire and turning it into reality. So we have a war now. One of the most important aspects of going to war is you should know your enemy. And clearly we don't know our enemy. We don't know Iran. We don't understand Iran. All the preparation that we've been doing has been based upon superficial analysis. The most, the obvious one of which is the notion of the rapidity or the possibility of rapid regime change inside Iran. The level of ignorance about the political reality of Iran. We call it an Islamic Republic because it is an Islamic Republic, but the Republic implies that there's far more to Iran than simply the supreme leader, that there's actually a constitution, a constitutional form of government that is embedded deeply within Iranian society today. And so we believe that by assassinating Ali Khamenei, that this would lead to a series of events that would result in the people of Iran in the streets and the Iranian government collapsed. We got half the equation correct. People of Iran are indeed in the streets by the millions, but they're not in the streets demanding the removal of the Islamic Republic. They're in the streets expressing their ardent support for the Islamic Republic. So the exact opposite has taken place. So we've already lost the war because this war is about regime change, and we're not going to change this regime. Now we come to the military aspect of it. I think that, we had anticipated, and actually it appears that we had factored into our military planning Iranian past practices of engaging in escalatory behavior, meaning you initiate a conflict, Iran responds, and then there's escalation management until some point either you achieve your objectives or you can gracefully exit the stage, or sometimes with a lack of grace as in the 12-day war. But Iran has thrown all of those calculations to the wind by engaging in massive retaliation across the board. And it's something we weren't prepared for. And so, as we seek to, accomplish military objectives, which are no longer attached to a viable political outcome. Remember, war is an extension of politics by other means. We don't bomb targets for just the sake of bombing targets. The targets we are bombing in Iran are supposed to generate reactions that are conducive to regime change. We now know the regime isn't going to be changed, so there's no reason to be bombing Iran, except that now we're stuck in a war where we have to bomb Iran. To what conclusion? We don't know, but it's not going to be regime change. But the bombing is not going, linked to Iran's retaliation. I think we have a bombing campaign that's supposed to achieve political results, and we have the Iranians retaliating in a manner that we weren't predicting. So we have military campaigns that are out of sync, and we can see this in how the United States has responded after initially saying that this was a campaign that was going to go on for days or maybe a week or so. Within 2 days, the United States is talking about we have to change things because they were confronted with the fact that Iran's massive retaliation put the ballistic missile interceptor stockpiles at risk. And if you lose the ability to intercept missiles, you lose the ability to survive in war. And so now we had to readjust that campaign. And now we're recognizing that an air campaign may not achieve the results we wanted, and people are talking about a ground campaign. So it's the United States and Israel that seem to be scrambling to come up with a military solution to the problem that they have created. And so far, they don't seem to have the solution. The Iranians, on the other hand, are committed to this existential war of survival. The notion that having started off by trying to decapitate the Iranians and to destroy Iran, and suddenly you have President Trump asking the Italians to make a phone call to see if there would be a ceasefire. Iran will accept no ceasefire. This war ends either with the total destruction of Iran or the total elimination of the American presence in the Middle East.
Well, in the fog of war, of course, propaganda plays a big part. And on both sides, no doubt, people are giving various figures. The latest figures I'm picking up about Iran and the civilian casualties may well be up above 1,000 now already. The Americans, of course, are not admitting as much, and the Israelis never admit to casualties. But what we're actually seeing in real time, of course, is wave upon wave, maybe 13, 14 waves of Iranian missiles, hypersonics, which are clean getting through. It seems as though the David Sling and the Iron Dome and the THAAD systems that were there in place, first of all, have actually betrayed the Anglo-Zionist, the Zio-Arabs, the Arab monarchies. But even when they're trying to protect Israel, they don't seem to be that effective. What's your assessment of the defense mechanisms that the US deployed to protect their main asset there, Israel?
Well, we already know that it's insufficient to the task. We know this because of Operation True Promise 1, Operation True Promise 2. We know this from the 12-Day War, Operation True Promise 3. And there's been no advance in technology that changes this reality. I mean, if you have a weapon system that's inadequate to the task, whether it's Israeli-made or American-made, simply deploying more of these weapon systems doesn't change the fact that these weapon systems, individually or collectively, are not capable of preventing Iranian missiles from striking the targets that they're seeking to strike. And so, this campaign never hinged on the ability to intercept 100% of Iran's missiles. The hope was that you could intercept a certain percentage of them, but that the air campaign would be able to suppress Iran's ballistic missile launch capability. And what we're seeing right now is that that hasn't been the case. We have seen a reduction in the number of missiles being fired, but that just may be Iran adjusting to the realities of a long-term campaign, pacing themselves, so to speak. But so far, the Israelis and the Americans have not shown an ability to prevent Iran from launching. And then once Iran launches, of course, there is no defense capable of stopping 100% or even anywhere near close to that Iran's missiles from striking their desired targets.
So the the Israelis themselves continue their air sorties, and they are still trying to knock out Iranian offensive capabilities. But that's clearly not working that well. What we seem to also be picking up is that the evaluation and assessment of munitions production by the US seems to be hugely flawed. There are some people who are saying that actually America can't produce mass weaponry the way perhaps Iran could. For instance, I think on ordinary bomb makers, the standard kind of bombs, they say there's one factory in Poland. So all this weapons making has been outsourced to corporate companies, and the actual Pentagon or the American military itself doesn't necessarily directly control how much they can produce. And I think Trump called in some of these weapons merchants to see if they could increase the production. So that's another indicator that they've made some serious miscalculations there. I mean, what if their munitions run out, basically?
Well, their munitions will run out because we haven't been producing the munitions to the degree necessary to sustain a conflict like this. But, this isn't the first time that this problem has emerged. We've run into this problem in the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, where Russia is engaged in a war of attrition with Ukraine and Ukraine's allies. Russia has geared up its defense industry to be at a war level of production, producing missiles, bombs. But we in the West haven't done the same. We do everything on the cheap. It's not Donald Trump or the Pentagon that builds bombs. It's defense industrial corporations, and they build bombs not on a whim. They build bombs based upon contracts.
Right.
And when you're at, they have a defense industry geared right now to a certain level of production, meaning they have a finite number of production lines, and they have a definite cap on production capacity. To expand that, you can't just say build more. You have to have them build more capacity. That means that you have to build new factories, new production lines. You have to hire new people. This is very expensive. And we aren't thinking in the long term. For instance, when we provide weapons to Ukraine, we're thinking, this contract is done. We think that every time we supply weapons, this will be the one that pushes Ukraine over. But we're in a war of attrition. So what we should have done from the very start is invest in the expansion of our defense industrial production capabilities. But we haven't done that. So now we've depleted our resources supporting Ukraine, especially when it comes to high-end items like ballistic missile interceptors. And now we have this expansive conflict in the Middle East where we're just burning through capacity, and we have no ability to regenerate this capacity. There's a finite number of interceptors that can be produced, and we're consuming interceptors at a rate greater than we can build them. Even when we talk about increasing capacity, the numbers aren't going to change until 2030. Last time I looked at the calendar, it's 2026. And so we're not even going to begin to, if we invested today, we're not going to reap the benefits of that until, 3 to 4 years down the road, which is too late.
Well, it also seems as though the trajectory of this war, if it's not resolved by the missile technique or the aerial battle, and no war is really won with simply aerial dominance, whether it's through ballistic missiles or whether it's through air power. That's, as a novice, I kind of know that. So, and you've clarified that actually regime change isn't possible because Iran has a very deep command and control structure with layers upon layers, and they're currently, of course, electing the new supreme leader, which seems to be a process which is going to go on. So no matter how many supreme leaders you kill, the system and the establishment will remain with exactly the same ideology and the same commitment to sovereignty. So the next part of the game plan, one would have thought, I guess from the Israeli perspective especially, would be ground operations. Now, the Americans don't seem to have more than 25 or 30,000 troops around the Zio-Arab monarchies or stationed around that region. They also do have, what they do have, of course, is proxies you and others have often pushed what I think is a fact, that ISIS is their proxy, the likes of Al-Qaeda, ISIS and HTS and Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS, Gilani, that fraternity are also moving. There was a release of a lot of ISIS prisoners up in the northern Syrian areas in Kurdistan, and there's a temptation, isn't there, perhaps, that they could commit these kinds of proxy forces. First of all, is there any chance of that kind of war kicking off, and what would be the impact of that in the region?
Well, first of all, let's just break it down. Israel has an army. It's not very good. We see that right now as they struggle in southern Lebanon against a Hezbollah ground force that is chewing up the Israelis. I think 6 Merkava tanks have been destroyed so far. The Israelis are just being wiped out. And so the notion of the Israeli army somehow breaking free of the southern Lebanon trap it's built for itself and being available for, operations far removed from there. So Israel can't support that. They logistically can't support that. Their troops aren't that good. They don't know how to fight that kind of war. So we can eliminate Israel as a source of troops. The United States, when you say 25,000 troops, these aren't troops. They're not combatants.
I see.
In the traditional sense of the word. These are support personnel. These are communicators. These are logisticians. These are intelligence people. But they're not frontline combatants. We don't have 25,000 troops that could go on the line with weapons and move. Those troops are far removed from the problem. We would have to massively reinforce our capacity in the Middle East by hundreds of thousands of combat troops that currently are sitting at their bases in the United States, not prepared for deployment. We being the United States, have allowed our military capacity to project serious military power to degrade. Back in 1990, 1991, we could deploy 750,000 troops because we were prepared to deploy 750,000 troops. And by 2003, we could deploy 200,000 troops, but that's all the capacity we had left. Today, we can't project more than 50, 60,000, and that's just not enough. And it would take forever for us to mobilize these sources. So the United States isn't going to be providing boots on the ground. So now we have to look to proxies. Let's forget about ISIS, because what we know about ISIS is that it's community-based. ISIS is strongest where they have communities where they are able to source their recruits. There's a reason why ISIS thrived in Syria, and that's because in the eastern Syrian deserts, you had tribal groups that were susceptible to, radicalization by, the Wahhabists or the Salafists.
Right.
But they're not able to, we saw when they expanded into Iraq, as they moved through Mosul and headed down through Tikrit into Baghdad, they ran into population groups that just weren't, primarily Shia population groups that cannot be radicalized by ISIS. And if ISIS can't take root in the community, ISIS has no chance of surviving. So I don't believe there's an ISIS threat to Iran. There is a Kurdish threat to Iran. There is a Baluch threat to Iran. There is a Mujahideen al-Khalq threat to Iran. There is a limited monarchist threat to Iran. There's the Lar, the Azeris, and others have groups. But these groups have never worked collectively. And individually, they're not capable of anything other than being a localized menace. And I believe, as we see, Iran is already taking preemptory action against the Kurds in northern Iraq to ensure that they won't be able to get up to any malfeasance. So again, this is just another aspect of the plan that is falling apart. We're running out of options in terms of the trouble we can cause in the region. And
turning my attention to the naval aspect, there was a lot of talk and a lot of visuals of the various warships, 3 in total, that eventually ended up parked in and around the Arabian Sea. The latest reports, conflicting reports, indicate that Iran did have a go at one of these warships, or at least the battleships that surrounded it, and the Abraham Lincoln, I believe it was, and it it pulled back. What truth is there on it? What's the reality about those warships? Are they involved directly in firing on Iran, or are they just simply allowing their aircraft to launch from there on sources across the Iranian air paths?
Remember, the purpose of a carrier battle group is not to get in a stand-up, knock-down, drag-out fight.
I see.
It's a weapon system designed to deploy project power from the sea to the shore. One of the ways you defend an aircraft carrier is to keep it out of harm's way. That's why you have aircraft that can launch at a distance. So, what did people want? The United States to sail the Abraham Lincoln right off the shore of Iran and say, "Here we are, sink us." No, that's not how it works. We carrier battle groups are survival because we have operational methodologies that take advantage of the fact that it can move in the open sea. We don't want the enemy to know where we are, and we can surround it with ships that provide, concentric rings of protection from any ballistic missile attack, etc. So the fact that the Abraham Lincoln keeps moving is just proof that that's what we do in a military operation. There's some reason to believe that because of Iran's area denial weaponry, missiles and drones, et cetera, the Abraham Lincoln has been operating at the extreme range of its capability to make sure there's enough distance between it and Iran to provide an additional layer of security.
Right.
But, so that's that. But also remember, carrier battle group isn't just about the embarked air wings on the aircraft carrier, but the also the weaponry that exists on the ships that are part of the battle group, ships and submarines. That carry cruise missiles, and these ships have been launching their Tomahawk cruise missiles against targets in Iran as well.
Right.
I don't see any evidence that the Abraham Lincoln was struck or damaged or had their combat operations, detrimentally impacted. They have been attacked, and you maneuver away from the attack. This is just what you do.
Right.
The Iranians last night reported that they did hit an American destroyer in the Indian Ocean that was replenishing underway. So far, I haven't seen any proof of this, but it does indicate that the Iranians continue to actively target the American fleet. This is just the reality of war.
And the other area probably that I haven't touched on, of course, is the neighbors. I mean, the Islamic Republic of Iran specifically targeted US bases around Qatar, Kuwait, even, I think, Saudi Arabia. And there have also been oil fields that have been hit deliberately or inadvertently, and there's others who are saying there are false flags in Saudi Arabia, certainly. And now there are rumors going around that Saudi Arabians are going to respond as well. That connection, I mean, Iran was loath to fight any of its neighbors. I think that tactically they didn't want to create that sort of bad blood. But once the US is there with its bases and it uses those bases for attacking Iran, it's standard practice that you're going to get hit. And do you think this drag in these what I call Zio-Arab monarchies into direct warfare with Iran themselves?
Well, first of all, this is a war of existential proportions. We need to remind your audience, I guess, that the United States and Israel assassinated the supreme leader of Iran on the very first blows, Ali Khamenei. They attempted to take out the entire leadership. The goal and objective of this campaign is to eliminate the government of Iran, to eliminate the Islamic Republic. So from the Islamic Republic standpoint, there's no reason to hold back. Because this is a war of existential proportions, the last thing the Iranians will want to do is engage in a conflict that simply allows the United States and Israel to pummel Iran, then have a ceasefire, and then 5 months later the conflict begins again with the other side able to replenish their resources, Iran continuing to be weak. Iran understands that this is it. This is the last conflict. And so their goals and objectives are likewise existential for the United States and Israel. The Iranian leadership has said this is it for Israel. We finished them now. And from the United States perspective, Iran is seeking to evict the United States from the region. How do you evict the United States? You destroy the bases from which they operate from, and you make it politically unviable for these Zio-Arabist entities to continue to have a strategic relationship with the United States. You do this by destroying the bases and by punishing the nations. And these nations they all have something in common. They get the vast majority of their economic wealth from oil and gas resources. And so Iran will be targeting those production. They've made it clear that not one barrel, not one metric ton of oil or gas will leave the Middle East. That they are going to strangle to death those nations who have supported the United States until those nations change the way they behave. This is the war that we're in, and the goal here isn't to have to bring an end to this conflict with America still in the Middle East. The goal here is to evict America from the Middle East. The goal here isn't to let Israel continue to labor under the pretense of somehow they're going to use the Abrams Accords and compliant, subservient Gulf Arab states to create greater Israel. The goal here is to break the back of the Gulf Arab states to ensure that they never again embrace an alliance with Israel, to isolate Israel, to weaken Israel, to eliminate the greater Israeli project, to liberate the people of Palestine. Even as the Iranians are being pummeled, they've made it clear that they continue to believe and support the notion of a free and independent Palestine. So Palestine's back on the burner. Everybody's ignoring it, but the Iranian goals and objectives of defeating greater Israel and the American imperialistic presence in the Middle East includes concluding this conflict with a free and independent Palestine. So this is truly a war of existential proportions. Now, you mentioned the Gulf Arab states maybe getting involved in military action. What a joke. What an absolute travesty of a joke. Saudi Arabia has been bombing Nasrallah since 2014, and they've lost. The United Arab Emirates has been attacking Nasrallah since 2014, and they've lost. So what now? These two nations who could not defeat Nasrallah are suddenly going to turn their military might to Iran? They have nothing to offer. More F-15s dropping more bombs on targets that aren't impacting the situation? Bring it on, because all Iran will do is then ratchet up the pressure. If Saudi Arabia wants to lose the totality of their oil production capacity, bomb Iran. If the United Arab Emirates wants to see every aspect of their energy production capability eliminated, bomb Iran. And I think that's where we're at right now. The Iranians, there's the old meme of the honey badger. When they say the honey badger doesn't give a damn. Well, Iran is the honey badger. It just doesn't give a damn anymore. If you want to fight, they'll fight. This is a war to the death. This is not a war of convenience, a war with limited, goals and aspirations. This is literally a war of existentialism. Iran is fighting for its survival, and it will take everybody down in this fight. Iran isn't fighting to lose. They're fighting to win. And they know what the weaknesses of their enemies are, and they will continue to exploit those weaknesses. So, again, I don't know what Saudi Arabia expects Iran to do. Quiver in fear? No. Iran will destroy Saudi Arabia. And they will destroy the United Arab Emirates. And you do that by strangling them economically. And Iran has a plan. Saudi Arabia doesn't have a plan. Right now, they're making phone calls through intermediaries to the Iranians saying, please, just let us drop a couple bombs on Fish Island, or we'll drop it off the coast of Chabahar, or we'll pick an empty building. Let us do something to save face. And Iran said, no, it's too late for that. Drop a bomb on us and we'll take it all out.
Well, we remember you'll remember, and those who are seasoned military experts, or those who lived out their time, remember the 8-year war. We remember how Saddam Hussein was sponsored by the West and the Arabs as well, the Zio Arabs, to attack Iran. And over 8 years, that war took the lives of at least 1 million Iranians and probably the same number of Iraqis. But Saddam used chemical weapons, again, made by German manufacturing companies and sanctioned by the West. They affected maybe something like 100,000 Iranian troops directly, and I think the number goes into 1 million that were actually indirectly affected. That was a sort of a kind of horrific use of you know, a weapon of mass destruction, which is illegal. Do you think that this war, given that Israel also has the Samson option, that once it's clear that Iran can basically, you know, win the war through the tactics that you've described, do you think there's, with the psychopaths who are in charge over in Tel Aviv, and with Trump being under the thumb of the Zionist lobby, one assumes, or being actually fundamentally part of it all, do you think that they'll go to that extreme? Are we looking at a situation where we could go that far? And I have to mention China, which has been supportive of Iran, increasingly supportive, practically, I think. Where do you think, what's your prediction in terms of how this could pan out regarding that bigger issue of nukes and weapons of mass destruction?
Well, you know, when the Iranians started the negotiations with Witkoff, they let him know that they have 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. And the calculations are that they could produce up to 11 atomic bombs. And, you know, when you go back to the fall of 2024, you know, there were signals coming out of Iran that there were influential elements of the Revolutionary Guard Command and even within the theocracy that were saying that Iran must produce a nuclear weapon, that the only way to deter this kind of conflict is through the possession of a nuclear weapon. The only thing that stood in the way of Iran going nuclear at that time was Ali Khamenei and his two fatwas that said, no, we will not do this. When I spoke with the Iranian president in September about this very issue, he said two things. One, Iran doesn't want a bomb, doesn't need a bomb, doesn't desire a bomb because their conventional ballistic missiles provide sufficient deterrence to anybody attacking. But two, he said, it's against our Islamic beliefs to possess a bomb. Well, they just killed him, Ali Khamenei, the one man, the only man to say no. When they formed the 3-person committee to replace Ali Khamenei temporarily until they elected a new supreme leader, that committee consisted of the Iranian president, the head of judiciary, and a theocrat appointed by the Assembly of Experts.
Yes.
That theocrat is somebody who believes that Iran should have a nuclear bomb.
Head of judiciary.
Right? So see what just happened there. Now we have people in Iran, now they've replaced Ali Khamenei with his son. And his son is likewise someone who believes that the nuclear path is now open. So be careful about playing the Samson option. First of all, it's a work of fiction. There is no Samson option. There's no formal, there's no plan called the Samson option. That's an invention of Seymour Hersh in his book, The Samson Option, where people talk about things like this. Israel has a nuclear weapons program, but it's clearly linked to a standing agreement with the United States on plausible deniability. There are things Israel would have to do before using a nuclear weapon, because once they use a nuclear weapon, they go into total isolation mode. It's the end of Israel. Israel can't use a nuclear weapon and expect to survive. They won't. So the weapon is a deterrence, and there are measures that have to go into place before they could even consider using these weapons. One thing, though, that we may very well see is that you know, back in, again, the fall of 2024, senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard people let it be known that Iran has all the components of a nuclear weapon deliverable by ballistic missile minus the fissile core, meaning they have designed a warhead. They have all the electronics involved in, you know, detonating this warhead, the safety aspects of it. They've built these warheads. All they need is the fissile core. They have 450 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. They have been able to set up 164 centrifuge cascades in a number of locations. These are advanced cascades. They're able to rapidly complete the enrichment in a matter of days, if not weeks, from 60% to 94%, which is what is necessary. They have the metallurgical capability to convert the uranium hexafluoride into metal and to form the metal into a crude gun-shaped device, which could be placed on this. So, if we want to talk about playing the nuclear arm, understand this. The way the nuclear game ends is with the complete physical destruction of Israel. the complete physical destruction of Israel. So I think people should stop talking about using nuclear weapons because, yes, we may be able to use nuclear weapons against Iran, but I'm concerned now that, one, Iran will build a nuclear weapon, and two, that if you push them too far, again, we're in the game of existential survival against a nation that embraces martyrdom. Ali Khamenei isn't dead. He's in heaven. He's a martyr sitting alongside Ali, Hassan, Hussein. Most Americans don't even know what I'm talking about. Yeah. If I said the Battle of Karbala, they wouldn't have a clue.
Sure. There's an ideological rootage within a divine kind of set of personalities. So with Karbala, the Shia ideology is rooted in martyrdom. You're absolutely right, yes.
And so now we have a nation that has millions of people in the street mourning the loss of Ali Khamenei, but not just mourning the loss, but actually crying tears of joy because Ali Khamenei is a martyr. He's in heaven, seated next to Moses and Jesus, waiting to come back down with the return of the Mahdi. And so if you think these people are worried about building a nuclear weapon and taking Israel off the face of the earth, think again. We are headed down the path of stupidity. We had a chance to make sure that Iran never, ever, ever built a nuclear weapon. We had a chance and we blew it. And now we're creating the conditions where not only will Iran build the nuclear weapon, but if we push them, they will use the nuclear weapon. 3 nukes against Israel eliminates Israel completely forever as a viable nation state. 5 nukes kills everybody in Israel. And this is probably going to happen if they continue to push this route. And then once nukes are used, there's no telling. You say, what about China? If the United States or Israel is insane enough to use nuclear weapons, the Chinese and the Russians both have to factor that into everything they do, to include their nuclear posture. Russia's already having an internal debate right now with very influential people like Sergei Karaganov saying, we need to use nuclear weapons right now against Europe. Right now, today. We need to nuke Poland and nuke Germany because they are operating under the belief. They are operating under the belief that the United States will not commit suicide on behalf of Europe. And I think they're right. I don't think the United States will retaliate with nuclear weapons against Russia because to do that means we all die. Karaganov has said American political leadership is not it will not sacrifice Boston for Poznan, and he's made a calculation. But the Russians have always avoided that because we had a relationship premised upon decades of arms control, nonproliferation, mutual respect. Donald Trump has thrown that all out the window. Donald Trump is the president of the United States who tried to assassinate Vladimir Putin while he was on the phone with Vladimir Putin using 91 Ukrainian drones directed to the target, a residence of Putin, by the CIA.
No,
this is true. This is fact-based. This is reality. And the Russians are waking up to this fact that you can't trust the United States. Kushner and Witkoff were the principal negotiating leads for the United States with Russia. These are the same men who committed perfidy against Iran. You can't trust them. And so, we're moving in a direction where all the infrastructure, all the framework of a civilized society has been destroyed by Donald Trump, by the United States, by Israel, and their actions against Iran. And so, the world has become an extraordinarily unpredictable place. And again, I'll just conclude with this. If Israel or the United States plays the nuclear card, Israel will cease to exist in its totality, and the likelihood of regional nuclear conflict with Russia and China using nuclear weapons to resolve the problem sets that the United States is creating becomes almost 100%. And then the question is, does Donald Trump want to commit global suicide by responding? And we don't know what the answer is on that one. I personally believe that yes. I will give you my 10 cents. I think Sergei Karaganov is wrong. And I'll say that right now. I like Sergei Karaganov. I respect Sergei, but you're wrong. Anybody who believes that Russia can launch a nuclear weapon against Europe and won't be immediately hit by the totality of America's nuclear arsenal, you're smoking dope. We just, that's just the way it's going to be. So we'll all die. But this is why we shouldn't even consider this. This is why Israel's continued possession of nuclear weapons is an affront to civilized society. Iran is not the threat. Israel is the threat. And the world needs to be focusing not on how to resolve the issue of Iran's theocratic succession, but rather how to eliminate this grotesque entity in Israel today, this greater Israel fantasy that's supported by American Christian Zionists who believe in Armageddon. I mean, hell, we have American military commanders right now telling their troops, this is the greatest thing, guys, because Armageddon is upon us. I mean, if that's your mindset, we're in trouble. If you have military people who believe that they are now involved in a process which leads to the rapture, we're done. Because when I was in the military, my job isn't to facilitate the coming of Jesus. My job is to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower maneuver, slaughter them on the battlefield, but not create the conditions for our collective demise. Our military's lost focus. They're led by this Christian pathetic lunatic named Pete Hegseth, who has now empowered similarly inclined generals to command our troops. We have inched up to the abyss, and we may have actually stepped off the abyss. We're in that moment where we are falling, and we are unaware of the fact that we're falling because it's a long way down. So it's this peaceful perception. For instance, if you've ever skydived, you jump out of the airplane, but for a while there you're just floating. You feel like you're floating. You're not. You're falling.
Right.
And if you wait long enough, you'll hit the ground and bounce and die. But right now we're in that mood where we're floating and we think this is great. This is wonderful. This can last forever, but it won't. We don't have a parachute. We're going to hit the ground and we're going to die. That's where we're at right now. I mean, the world has gone insane. And anybody who supports the United States and Israel against this illegal war of aggression against Iran is promoting collective suicide.
Well, I'm riveted. I want to carry on mining your extraordinary sort of forensic analysis and the kind of bold predictions and some real clarity there and some frightening stuff as well and some great warnings for those out there who are war hawks, who seem to think this is a walk in the park. I think Scott's just outlined exactly why the war needs to stop. It's a ridiculous war. It should never have started. It has begun. Now, we all, I think, need to rally around and put pressure on our establishments. We know they're oligarchies. We know they'll still try to carry on. But it's our duty, actually, to stop the war as soon as possible, because the thing that we haven't perhaps touched on is that blowback is already beginning to happen. What's happening with ICE and the methodologies and the techniques that are being used. Well, it's invariable that when you create a sort of a kind of a bloodthirsty psychopathic war mentality at every level of your institutions, you're going to get that coming back. And it's going to be the chicken that's going to come home to roost. That's the other aspect. I can't add any more to what Scott has said. An absolutely brilliant analysis. And I'd love for you to be back again, Scott. And thank you very much for that. Lots of food for thought. Do like, share, and subscribe to Deep Dive Perspective. Scott, is there anywhere that people can see you more regularly on a consistent basis, your own channel that I should mention?
Well, what you could do is go to scottritter.com. It leads you to my Substack page. And on that Substack page, you'll be able to access not just podcasts that I originate. I'm very proud of for instance, my Russia House podcast, which seeks to talk about the reality of Russia. I do Ask the Inspector. But I appear on a variety of shows. And people are kind enough to provide me with links. And then I put those links in my Substack page. And then the writing that I do is there. There's no paywall, so you feel free to go in and browse as you like. If you like what you see, of course, you can subscribe. That's always an option, or you can donate. I'm preparing to go on a trip. I'll just make this. I'm preparing to go on a trip to Russia later this month. An important part of this trip is focused on an initiative that I put forward before this war on the role that Islam can play in resolving this conflict that right now we tend to ignore Islam or we demonize Islam. But the fact of the matter is, Islam has played a very important role in resolving some of the major conflicts of our time. And so this project is geared towards that. And since this conflict began, the people that I'm coordinating with and myself have both realized that we're onto something here, that we need to exploit this and follow through. I'm an independent journalist, which means that I pay for everything. I pay for my airfare, I pay for my hotels, my food, everything. And which means you pay for it if you want it to happen. And what I mean by that is this only happens because of donations. So if you like this work, feel free to go to scottritter.com, go to the Substack page. There's a donation page. And I can promise you this, anything you donate will be used effectively. I don't squander your resources. I don't disrespect your support. That's that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. And you're absolutely an invaluable source, and I would recommend it. And also, don't forget A Deep Dive Perspective, because we're the smaller, minnow version of Scott and a lot of the other great people out there who are doing some fantastic work. Until the next Deep Dive Perspective, thank you and goodbye.